Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're well, and we are just waiting for some more people to join us. The number is going up, so we will give another minute before we kick off. And thank you for everyone who has joined already. And we hope that you will find it interesting this morning in New York in your afternoon. So just to introduce myself, my name is Aidan Cronin. With UNICEF based in New York, Senior Advisor for Results and Resources. And today's topic is very close to my heart, given the centrality of water and sanitation to the climate crisis. So we're going to talk this morning on indicators to monitor climate resilient wash and the process that's been going on now over the past year plus on that. So we'll be getting into details on that. And I see we now have 24 attendees. So maybe we will kick off and we will start the webinar. And thank you all again for joining. So we'll go to the next slide. So the objectives of today's webinar are really to provide an update on the review process so far for identifying indicators to monitor climate resilient wash and to launch the public consultation on the long list of potential indicators for monitoring climate resilient wash. And you'll hear in full detail what those are as we go through the session. And please do take this chance also to introduce yourself in the chat box. We would love to hear, the purpose of today's webinar is really to get your thoughts and questions. So please feel free to be very active on the chat box today. We'd love to know your ideas, your thoughts, concerns, queries, etc. So we move to the next slide, and I had already mentioned this, using the chat box for questions and comments, which we will be taking, and there will be time to address those. And if there isn't, we'll come back via email. We are recording the webinar, and we will be sharing the recording and the slides with everyone afterwards. So please do feel free to be very active on the chat. So we move to the next slide, which is really on the agenda. The opening, we will then move in. Betsy from WHO will tell us on explain the project and what we've been doing. We've Professor Barbara Evans from the University of Leeds, who will talk about, who is part of the consortium looking at both the review and now the next stage of long list to a shorter list of potential indicators. And then, of course, we'll have an explanation of the next steps and closing. So maybe with that, I will pass it over to you, Betsy, to take it from here. And once again, welcome everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Aidan, and thanks everyone for joining. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. So next slide, please. So before getting into about the project, I wanted to just give you all a sense of who we are. So this project is led by a secretariat made up of team members from the JMP and GLAAS from both WHO and UNICEF. So from on the WHO side, we have Fiona Gore, who is the GLAAS team leader, Marina Takane, who is on the GLAAS team and also the Wash Accounts project manager, and myself. We also have Janet Ateem, who is the GLAAS focal point at UNICEF. On the JMP side, we have Tom Slaymaker from UNICEF and Rick Johnston from WHO. Next slide, please. And so just to give you a little background on what both GLAAS and the JMP do, we wanted to just briefly introduce both monitoring initiatives. So JMP is a joint monitoring program that focuses on the monitoring of drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. They compile and report national data on outputs and outcomes. That means how many people, how many schools, how many healthcare facilities have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, or what level of services those settings and households are using. And this data feeds into reporting on SDG targets 6.1 and 6.2. And you can see that in the odd years, JMP produces updates on households, and the next household update will be coming later this year. And in even years, the JMP produces updates on WASH in schools and WASH in healthcare facilities. And if you want to learn more about the JMP and explore some data, I encourage you to go to washdata.org. Next slide, please. So while JMP monitors the outputs and outcomes, GLAAS, which stands for the UN Water Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water, focuses on the inputs. And so the GLAAS country survey covers finance, monitoring, governance, and human resources. And that looks at what are those factors that are helping countries make progress towards SDG Target 6. And we also, the GLAAS feeds into monitoring SDG Target 6A and 6B. And so we look at the inputs, we have a country-led survey process, and we also produce GLAAS reports. The next GLAAS report will be coming in 2025. We are currently in the process of drafting that report. And if you would like to learn more about GLAAS, I encourage you to check out the GLAAS data portal at glaas.who.int. The next slide, please. So now that we all know a little bit about GLAAS and JMP, you can see that those programs are well positioned to start to monitor climate resilient WASH. And at the moment, there are not agreed upon indicators to monitor climate resilient WASH. So that GLAAS and JMP have started a review of this topic. And the review consists of identifying frameworks, indicators, data collection opportunities, and data describing links between climate resilience and WASH. To support this work, last March, we selected a consortium of research partners, and that includes the University of Leeds, the University of Bristol, Oxford University, and University of Technology, Sydney. And they've been working very, very hard on producing the long list of indicators, which we will talk in much more detail about shortly. The JMP and GLAAS Secretariat also established a technical working group to provide inputs and reviews of the outputs. The technical working group is listed on the project website, which we'll put in the link into the chat. But it is a wide range of climate experts and WASH experts with varying backgrounds, with geographic representation from around the world. And then finally, the review will focus on outputs. The outputs will focus on identifying areas where GLAAS and JMP could focus future monitoring efforts. And a key aspect of this whole project has really been engaging with multiple stakeholders. So we've held public webinars in July last year, earlier this year in February, and you're currently participating in the April webinar. And we're excited during this webinar to launch the public consultation of the long list. And then we will continue to keep having outreach through webinars, through global events, conferences, and training webinars. And we will put in a link so you can sign up for our newsletter so you can hear all of the information about upcoming events about this work. And then importantly, all of the results of this are feeding into work on the global goal on adaptation. And it's part of the identification of indicators for the GGA Water Target 9A. And next slide, please. And so just a little bit about the global goal on adaptation. It has 6 thematic targets, and you'll see that the first thematic target is water, and it is significantly reducing climate-induced water scarcity, enhancing climate resilience to water-related hazards, towards a climate-resilient water supply, climate-resilient sanitation, and towards access to safe and affordable potable water for all. The other topics are all also related to water. There's food and agricultural production, climate change related to health, ecosystems and biodiversity, resilience of infrastructure and human sediments, and poverty eradication and livelihoods. So those are the 6 thematic topics of the global goal on adaptation. And next slide, please. In addition to that, there are 4 targets in relation to the iterative adaptation cycle, which is kind of like a project management cycle. And those are impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment, planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And the goal of all of this process, and it has been a very political, very complex, very participatory process on determining these targets for the GGA. And the idea is that we are moving towards a manageable set of no more than 100 indicators by November. That's when the COP30 will be at Belém. And next slide, please. And so we've been working very closely with the GGA process. Tom from UNICEF has been actively involved in the GGA process, and WHO and UNICEF have submitted information throughout it. And so I just wanted to show that our timeline aligns with the GGA process as well. And so you can see we're at the pink bullet right now, which is launch of the public consultation on the long list of indicators. And then starting at the top, we engaged the academic consortium in March 2024. We had our first technical working group meeting in July of last year. We had a public webinar shortly thereafter. And then we've had our first technical working group. Well, that was the kickoff meeting in July. Then the first official technical working group meeting was in December. We had another public webinar in February and a second working group meeting in February. After the public consultation, we'll be working with the academic consortium and the technical working group on prioritization and shortlisting of the indicators. And then we will have a third technical working group meeting in September on the shortlist, and then there'll be another public consultation. So we are actively working on figuring out what these indicators should be. And next slide, please. So our review has been going on for quite some time now, and what have our outputs been? First of all, we have produced a scoping document, which is called Climate Resilient Wash Monitoring Scope and Definition. There is a discussion paper, which highlights the results of the academic reviews that the consortium has undertaken, and that includes indicators, measures, and methods for monitoring climate resilient wash. And then there's the long list of indicators, and that is available in both an Excel file and an interactive PowerPoint. And you can go online to that website, or you can also sign up to receive more updates. Next slide, please. So Barbara and James are going to get into more details about findings from the long list and how the long list works, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the key points from the academic reviews that our academic partners spent a lot of work on. So thank you all to all of their hard work as well. So first of all, there are many frameworks for climate resilience, both within and outside the WASH sector, but there are lots in the WASH sector. The frameworks propose many attributes and adaptations that adaptation actions that could be used as indicators for climate resilient wash. There's also lots of indicators that have been proposed, but there is limited evidence to show how good these indicators are at predicting climate resilience. Frameworks used in wash adjacent sectors give us good information about how to express indicators of service outcomes and user satisfactions. And then the Secretariat, but mostly the academic consortium, they were able to propose a subset of indicators for adaptation actions, attributes, and service outcomes, and user satisfaction with a degree of confidence, but the level of evidence back to these will all be variable. And you'll see that when you start exploring the long list. And so from about over 1,500 individual proposed indicators that we have read about, we have developed a long list of only about 400 indicators to consider as candidates for monitoring climate resilient wash. So we've already narrowed quite a few down, and you will just be looking at 400 during this public consultation. Next slide, please. So now the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for is, how does this public consultation work? What does it look like? I know we've put the link on the screen a few times, but if you go to this QR code, it will take you to our project website, and that has all of the information about the public consultation. And the public consultation is an opportunity to review the long list of candidate indicators, help us to prioritize indicators, help to fill any gaps. And it's also an opportunity to propose new indicators. It will take place online up until May 9th, and all of the links that you need to participate can be found at the link through that QR code. And there are multiple ways to participate. Well, there's 3 ways to participate in the public consultation, either through SurveyMonkey, through an interactive PowerPoint with links to a SurveyMonkey, or by sending us emails. And Barbara will get into more details with that. And so now I would like to turn it over to Barbara, and thanks everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Betsy. I just want to immediately address a question in the chat about whether or not the slides will be available, and they absolutely will be available on the project website along with the recording, because we do know this is a lot of information. So briefly, I just want to talk about the preparatory work that we've done for this consultation, and this is work that's been done by the Secretariat, who you've already met, along with this amazing academic team. And I particularly want to call out Lily King, James Wallace, Kelly Moon, and Anisha Nijhawan, who led the review processes from which we've drawn a lot of the findings that we're going to share. Next slide, please, James. So we want to get your input on this long list. And before you do that, you need to understand what's in the long list. So we want to help you to explore the long list of existing indicators. And the first thing that you might want to look at are 2 documents which are available on the website. One is the scoping and definitions document, which explains what's included and excluded in the whole project. And I'm going to go through that briefly in a moment. And then there is a discussion document which summarises what we found during the review. So those 2 documents are not long and generally quite helpful to read those, or at least skim through them before you start to look at the long list. So going to the scope of the project, we thought about this a lot, and we did a lot of work in the first 6 months of the project, including a couple of sessions with our technical working group, and also this was discussed in the public webinars, to develop this scope document. So this essentially, this diagram explains what's included inside the project and what's not included. So everything that's inside the blue dashed line is in scope of this project, and everything that's outside the blue dashed line are important things which are nonetheless excluded. So outside the dotted line, we see broader adaptive capacity ideas around service providers, around general societal resilience, around the broader resilience of water resources, for example, and societal governance structures. All of those are clearly influence the resilience of the WASH sector, but are outside. Inside, we have on the right-hand side of this document the things we are interested in achieving. So we're interested in the blue boxes in achieving a sustained or appropriate level of water and sanitation service functioning and hygiene capabilities during and after, in the run-up to, during and after climate shocks, climate events, climate trends, and climate stresses. So that's during short and long-run climate stresses on the system. And we're also interested in how users experience those services under the same climate stresses. So we're not just interested in whether the taps keep running, we're also interested in the extent to which users experience anxiety or confidence in the system in a climate stress situation. So that's the blue and yellow outcome end of the framework. What contributes to that is how we've broken down all of the indicators which you'll see in the long list. So I'm just going to go through this in some detail. James, if you could go to the first slide. So the first set of things we're interested in here on the left of the diagram are adaptation actions by national governments and by subnational governments. So that's policies, institutions, regulation and finance, all the things which governments can put in place to promote climate resilience in the WASH sector. So that aligns very nicely with paragraph 10 of the Global Goal for Adaptation. Further to the right, as a consequence of that, we're then interested in adaptation actions which might be taken by water and sanitation service providers, or by users, or by people that work in hygiene promotion or in the supply chain of hygiene materials in order to sustain services under climate stresses. Also linked in the next slide are adaptation actions which relate to water resources and land management, which are directly associated with sustaining water supply services, and adaptation actions which relate to coordination with solid waste and drainage, which is something we know is very important for the climate resilience of sanitation services. Then we're interested in the attributes of water and sanitation and hygiene infrastructure and of the water resources for water supply and receiving waters. So here we're interested in the physical systems. This is the place where we organise our thinking around what kind of materials are used to construct systems, how deep are pipes laid, where do we locate key pieces of critical infrastructure, how do we build flood protection, all of those sort of physical things come under these headings here. And then, as I said, we're interested in the outcome. So what kind of service functioning do we see? What kind of aspects of service functioning would we want to measure, which we could say would be good indicators that the entire system is climate resilient? And finally, we ask the same question about the user experience. So this framing, these categories of things, if you like, here on this diagram will come up again and again during our talk today. And as you look through the long list, every potential indicator is mapped to one of these domains in our framework. So we're interested in making sure that we're measuring all of these domains in order to establish the probability that a wash system would be climate resilient. So moving on. Just to clarify, to help you explore the long list of indicators, as I said, there's those 2 reference documents that I've already mentioned, and there are 2 tools. Each of these tools shows the same list of indicators. We have organized them on an Excel file, and we've organized them in an interactive PowerPoint file. And we've done this in 2 ways because we know that some people have Excel-shaped brains and some people have PowerPoint-shaped brains. And some of you probably have different shaped brains. So it's just, we're trying to find the best way to help you navigate through what is quite a complicated and long list. James is going to introduce you to both those tools. And one of the things that we want to say is that before you give us feedback, we would really like to encourage you to look at the background documents that I mentioned and these long list tools, because we, along with the technical working group and with colleagues who participated in the public webinars earlier, we have done a lot of work already. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to James, who's going to walk you through the 2 long list tools.
Thanks, Barbara. So, yeah. So as Barbara said, there are two tools that you'll be using to navigate through the long list. There are the Excel version and the PowerPoint. So I'm going to talk you through the Excel version first. So as the others have presented, you can download these 2 tools from the website. Once you've downloaded these tools, you can open them. And then as you open the Excel version, you will see a screen similar to this, where we have several tabs along the bottom, and then our conceptual framework, which Barbara just described. The only difference is that this version is color-coded. And this is just to aid us as we navigate through this document, as the color coding matches some of the tables. And as we said earlier, each of the indicators is coded to one of these components of the framework. So that's why we're kind of we're going through it over and over again, so you're familiar with all of the components. So the next tab along the bottom is the summary pivot table, which is the magenta one. So I'll go to that one. So this table here summarizes all of the data, all of the information that's in the indicator master sheet. And that master sheet contains all of the indicators that we have extracted and derived from the reference material that's in the discussion paper. So along the top of this pivot table, there are the components of the framework, which are color-coded to match the image I just showed you. And then down the side, there are the components of the service chain for each of the WASH subsectors. So we have sanitation, water supply, hygiene, and then the whole WASH system. And then in the body of the table, we have some values, and these values represent the number of indicators which fit into each of these categories. So for example, we have 18 attributes of WASH infrastructure, which fall into the category of user interface capture and containment for sanitation systems. So this is a summary of all of the information that's in the master sheet, just to show where we have indicators and where they fit into our framework and where they fit into the service chains for each of the subsectors. So moving on to the next part of the presentation is the indicator master sheet. And this is probably or likely to be the main area which you will be spending most of your time when you're reviewing indicators in the Excel version. So this table has several columns with information relating to the indicators, and I'll go through each of those so we're clear on what these contain. So the first one's very simple. It's just the reference number for each indicator. They've got a unique reference number, and it follows a simple pattern where LL for long list and then a number. So this first one's LL001. The next column is whether the indicator pertains to a particular part of WASH. So that could be water supply, sanitation, or hygiene. The next column is the attribute or adaptation, action, or outcome. And these are essentially the desired outcome of the indicator. So for this top one, we have a climate resilient user interface capture and containment, and that's what we want this indicator to achieve almost. And then the next column E, is the specific whether the indicator is specific to a particular climate hazard, and that should be fairly easy. The next one is the framework component it relates to, and those again are those boxes that are on the framework that Barbara just went through and I just showed the color-coded version of. The next one is the indicator objective. And then column H is kind of this is the most important part of this table, which is the indicator itself, hence why it's bolded for you guys. And then the next column is whether the indicator has any measurements or targets. And then the final 5 columns are related to any source or reference material related to the indicators. So I'll just go through those. So the first one, the source of the indicator, there are 3 categories. There are indicators that came from the review process, which are outlined in the discussion document. There are some which come from the consortium, which generally were developed where we found gaps that weren't covered in the review process. But also you can see that some are derived from evidence that were found in the reviews as well. And then the final category in this column is indicators which come from academic and grey literature, which is outside of the review process. So the next column is whether the indicator has any evidence. And you can see here there are 3 different types here. So there's ones with evidence, ones that are derived from evidence, and ones that have no evidence. In the next column, if they do have evidence, we can see that whether they are qualitative or quantitative evidence. And then column T shows if the indicator did come from one of the reviews, which of those reviews it came from. So each of the reviews had a unique ID as well. And they are noted in the discussion paper as well, so you can follow that. The final column contains any references for the indicators, so you can copy and paste those references into your web browser and have a look at those references in more detail if you so wish. Okay, so that's the master sheet table. There are a few more tabs which are in this Excel version. Those are the color-coded ones at the bottom. So you've got a blue one, a green one, and an orange one. I'll show you the sanitation one just as an example. This is just another way of looking at the same data that's summarized from the master sheet, similar to the magenta pivot table as well. You can see in column A, we have the position along the sanitation value chain. And then column B shows the number of indicators which fit into that grouping. You can expand these groups by clicking the plus icon. So we'll do that now. And then these groups are further broken down by the indicator objectives. So you can expand these ones also by clicking the plus arrows. And then you can see all of the indicators that fit into those categories. So that's just another way of looking at the indicators. Yeah, so as the others said, we have the Excel version, but as there are lots of indicators and not everyone wants to sit and look through a long table of indicators, we thought we'd try and come up with a more fun way or easy on the eye way of looking at the indicators. And we landed on this, which is an interactive PowerPoint version. So you can, again, download this from the website from the links provided. Once you open up the PowerPoint version, you'll see this, this sort of screen. It's really important at this point to click this icon here, which brings you into the presenter mode. And then from this, you can start to navigate for the indicators. It's important you click this link, this icon, sorry, so that all the hyperlinks work, which is the way you'll be navigating through the document. So once you've clicked that icon, you'll be taken into the full screen mode. And the next slide along will be the some navigation guidance. So there's a 5 or 6 minute long video where I do a little tutorial of how to use this document, but because I'm here now, I can quickly show you. So if you'd open this document, you watch the video, you would then click onto the conceptual framework link, which is this blue hyperlink in the bottom left corner. And then that takes you to the conceptual framework. Again, this is the same conceptual framework that Barbara presented and I showed earlier, showing the different components of our framework. This time you can notice that they've all got a blue link. So this is our kind of main menu. And from this menu, you can navigate to the indicators that you're interested in by clicking through these links. So say, for example, I'm interested in adaptation actions by national or subnational governments. I can click on the blue hyperlink, which is in the in this red box, this red circle. So I click on that, and that takes me to another menu. So here, these indicators are in the component of the framework, which is adaptation actions by national and subnational governments. They've been further split down by the WASH subsectors, so water supply, sanitation, hygiene, and then those applicable to the whole WASH system. And then they've been further broken down into policy, regulation, institutions, and finance. They've been organized in this way because these are the indicators relating to national and subnational governments. In other components of the framework, they've been organized slightly differently by the service chains for each of the WASH subsectors, but you'll notice that when you get into those ones. So say, for example, I'm interested in indicators relating to policy and sanitation systems. I can click on this, this white link here, highlighted in red, and that takes me to the table. So just to be clear, this is the same table you would see if you were in the Excel version and you filtered by policy and sanitation systems. You'd see the same information. This is just another way of looking at the same information. So now I'm at this stage, and I want to look at LL62 in more detail. So I will click here. And then I'm brought up to another screen showing information related to LL62. And again, all of this information is available in the long list in the same row as LL62. This is just the same information extracted and presented in a more kind of visually appealing way, I guess, to some people. Once you're at the screen, you might want to comment on the indicator. You can click on this link at the bottom, comment on this indicator. This is then linked to another web page where you can provide your feedback. So it's quite simple to use. You just, there are two things to fill out. The first one is a drop-down menu, which is in the question 1 of the feedback form. So you just locate the indicator that you want to comment on. So in our case, it was LL62. So you find LL62 from the drop-down menu, and then provide your feedback in the box, in box 2. Click done, and then return to the document to then continue reviewing indicators. So those are the two methods of reviewing the long list, the Excel version of the PowerPoint. Hopefully that was clear. And I'll pass back to Barbara, who will talk some more about some of the candidate indicators that are in the long list. Thanks.
Thank you so much, James. So yeah, just to talk a little bit about where these indicators came from and what we're asking you to think about while you're looking at them. So the first thing to say is that some of the indicators in the long list were directly migrated from existing WASH frameworks, WASH monitoring tools, where they aligned with our conceptual framework and filled necessary gaps. So here are two examples. LL175 is an example of a question which exists in the 2024-25 GLAAS survey, which was implemented over the last few months, and which is providing, that survey is providing the data for the upcoming, the next GLAAS report. LL46 is an example of an indicator that was in the GWP UNICEF strategic framework for WASH climate resilient development. And so these are examples where we've just lifted the text straight into the long list. Just to say that at this stage, we haven't wordsmithed these items into, I mean, these ones will probably be very well wordsmithed because they come from existing frameworks, but not all of the indicators are necessarily perfect indicators. What we're really interested in at the moment is the sort of topic of things for which indicators are needed. Going to the next slide, there are some which we developed based on what we call WASH adjacent sectors. So we looked also not just at frameworks for climate resilience in WASH, but frameworks for climate resilience in similar sectors. So that included health, solid waste, transport, energy. And here we were able to take some indicators and modify them so that they filled potential gaps in climate resilient WASH. So LL349, for example, is an example of an important idea which is that individual household actions to manage solid waste have an impact on the performance of sanitation systems, and that's been amended to talk about whether solid waste management actions are included in sanitation behaviour change campaigns. So that's an example of a modified framework. Similarly, LL 460 is about menstruation. That's an example of something which we know is important. It's a service outcome that we know is important, but it's not yet been turned into something climate specific. So we know this is an important area, but it's not yet a climate specific indicator. Going to the next slide, there are some indicators in frameworks which were shared by people who responded to our call for contributions, some of whom may be yourselves. Some of these were based on externally generated scenarios, which were so specific to the monitoring document that we didn't think they were appropriate. So at the top here, we can see one that is about total duration of solid waste collection interruption. It's obviously relating to solid waste. We might have modified it for sanitation, but that's relating to specific climate change scenarios which were developed for the purposes of that document. Some of the potential indicators are not actually indicators, but actions. So we've got something here about assessing cost effectiveness, and some of them were too specific to a given sector. And particularly we have an issue that some of them are too binary. So the average length of flight delays is a good example here. Going to the next slide. One of the two challenges, one is about climate specificity and climate relevance. So here, there is an interesting challenge that there are things which relate to water supply and sanitation, which we might put in a bucket called good quality wash. So management of non-revenue water is a good example of this. It's good practice in the water sector. However, it could be argued that it's also particularly important for areas which are under water stress. So we have included some indicators, for example, here 475 and 476, which relate to non-revenue water. And one of the things that we're asking you to reflect upon is the extent to which these non-climate specific but highly climate relevant indicators should be included in our understanding of how to monitor climate resilient wash. And in the next slide, going back to my point about some sectors having very binary indicators, so your electricity supply is on or off, or your flight delay is more or less than 6 hours. One of the interesting challenges in WASH is that our baselines tend to be quite variable. So, we've always dealt with service ladders in water supply and sanitation and hygiene. And where service is not binary, under climate stress, people who start somewhere at a different position on the ladder are going to experience navigating between options in different ways. So the question is, how do we handle tolerable variability when the context will be very variable and the nature of the climate stresses that we're dealing with will be very variable in different contexts? So a couple of ideas that we have captured in the long list, but there's probably more work that we could do on this. We looked, for example, at the work that's been done at the London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine to develop the SAN-QoL. That's a measure of the quality of sanitation service provision based on the idea of the QALY, which is the quality of life years measure that's used in health economics. And we've also pulled in some of the thinking from the HWISE and IWISE work that's relating to household and individual level water security. Next slide, please. Eventually, we will have to take some of these ideas and think not just about what to measure, but how to measure it. And I just want to flag up that the WHO measuring the climate resilience of health systems framework, which we have drawn on quite a lot, has a very interesting way of doing this, where it distinguishes between resilience to short-term and long-term risk. And then in every case, it looks at short-term responses and long-term responses. So these are ideas which are not yet included in the long list because the long list is already long and complicated, but bear in mind that a lot of these indicators might lend themselves to having multiple sort of stepwise scoring, if you like. And that's something else as you go through looking at the long list. If you have thoughts on how we might do that, please do add those thoughts in. Next slide, please, James. So just to recap, there are two very important resource documents, the scoping document and the discussion document. There are two ways of looking at the long list, the Excel file and the interactive PowerPoint, and there are three ways that you can give us feedback. The first way is on the website, on the project website, there is an interactive survey tool, a Survey Monkey, which is a big, complete survey tool. So if you've read all of the resources and you simply want to give us feedback on your general impressions of a range of different components, you might want to use the Survey Monkey as a way of guiding you through a process of giving us feedback. There is a second Survey Monkey embedded in the interactive PowerPoint, which is the best way for you to give us feedback directly on individual candidate indicators. So that's what James showed you earlier. And finally, if you don't have a Survey Monkey brain, which some people may not, of course, you are very welcome to give your feedback to us via email. And there's an email address on the website that you can use. We do appreciate it's a lot of information, so please do take your time to explore what's on the website. And at that, I think I'm handing back to Fiona. Can't actually remember. Yes.
You are indeed. LL475 calling base. So thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you, James, and thank you to all the presenters. And I think particularly for keeping to time and sharing what I would say a lot of information. So I see that you're all particularly overwhelmed. And thanks, Remy, for recognizing the powerful PowerPoint, which was produced by James and Lily and Kelly and all these smart young students, really quite powerful. So thank you for that. And Remy, actually, you've just posted a question. What kind of feedback is the most useful for the team and what kind is less useful? Well, I'll maybe just start off by saying any feedback is useful. And we really want to make sure that we get the evidence and feedback that we can then help us work towards going from the long list to the short list. But as Barbara has just outlined in the three options that we have, I think it really depends, you know, on how and what you're most comfortable using Survey Monkey and actually using the various tools and the interactive PowerPoint that James has demonstrated. And all of this information, just to repeat, is available on the website that we've posted several times in the chat. I mean, Barbara, I think also I turn this question to you because you and the team are going to be working towards compiling all the feedback. What would be the most useful manner to receive this feedback?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple of ways to parse this. So one thing I would say is that the domains of the framework are one guide. So if you are a person that is particularly working at the policy level, for example, or particularly working on the design of water systems, if you could look at the indicators which fit in that domain where your expertise lies, we would very much welcome views looking across a whole domain. So let's take a good example that one of the domains is the attributes of water supply systems. So there we're looking at the attributes of water storage, the attributes of water distribution networks. If you have expertise in those areas, please do look at all of those indicators taken together. And the most useful thing we'd like to know is, are there gaps? And are there particular items on the list or that you think are gaps which would be particularly important and critical to measure? So a sort of prioritization within those domain areas would be incredibly helpful. And in the big Survey Monkey, there is an opportunity for you to do that. The least useful feedback is to spend your time doing too much wordsmithing. We really haven't spent a lot of time wordsmithing the words which are listed as the candidate indicators. At the moment, we're really trying to find the indicator areas that we want to focus on. We will go through a separate process with the shortlist of wordsmithing. So your impressions of the general overarching sets of indicators in each of the domains are probably the most useful feedback.
Great, thank you, Barbara, for sharing that. I think we've still got few minutes for a few more questions to be taken from the chat. And thank you, Tom, for recognizing the impressive work that has been done by the whole team. Tom is asking, have you classified the indicators by what is being measured? For example, is this about specific infrastructure or the population experience? Or put another way, how do you envision these indicators being combined into a survey? Would this be something collected during an evaluation, indicators compiled at the national level, part of routine monitoring? And maybe I'll start off with just maybe saying a few words, and then maybe Barbara, I'll pass over to you. And really, the idea with the core set of indicators that we aim to develop is to be integrated into national monitoring, but also into global monitoring through the GLAAS and JMP. Speaking from the GLAAS perspective, we have for a certain number of cycles been collecting information about climate resilience, and we have included quite a few number of questions in this current cycle of 24-25, and we'll be reporting back on some of the current practices being taken at country level in the next GLAAS report that's going to be launched towards the end of this year. And there is quite a lot of flexibility, particularly on updating the GLAAS survey, where we will be able to include a certain number of new questions as we move along in the future and be able to collect this type of information. But ultimately, the idea is really to strengthen information systems at national level to be able to collect this kind of information in national information systems. Barbara, do you want to maybe take the first part of the question there?
Yes, I think it's a really good question. I think our vision here is definitely to collectively as a sector to come up with an agreed set of indicators that we think are appropriate for which data could be collected and suitable for global monitoring. In the discussion document, we've talked a little bit about how we might know whether an indicator is a suitable thing to be measuring. But I think all of us are very much aware of two things. One, as Fiona said, is that all global data is generated by national systems and processes. So to the extent possible, it should derive from that. Well, to all extent, it should derive from that. But also that the work we're doing will hopefully provide some useful input. So we imagine that at the end of it, we will have a very short list of indicators that we might prioritise for global monitoring and a slightly longer list of good quality indicators that we would say could be useful for use at national level or programmatic level or whatever it might be. So we're trying to make it as useful as we can for people at multiple levels. One small thing to also add is, in addition to wordsmithing when we come to do the shortlist, the other thing we have is some experts on the team who will then also think about data collection tools and methods. Somebody in the chat has mentioned surveys, and obviously survey instruments remain very important, but there are other ways of collecting data. There are big data sets out there, there is remote sensing. So one of the things we will do is also explore options to advise national governments and local practitioners on how people could go about collecting the data that you would need to collect in order to populate the indicators that we think are important. Back to you, Fiona.
Great. Thanks very much, Barbara. And I promise I won't call you LL475.
You can call me that. I love it. I think I'm going to rechristen myself.
Excellent. And I think, Barbara, actually, you've touched upon a few questions that have come up in the chat. I think Magdalene asked also a question about the GLAAS, JMP, global monitoring mechanisms, and we've touched upon how these could be integrated into some of these mechanisms at national level, but also at regional and global level. Also, I think you've touched upon in your response to some of Anthony's points and Tom's. So thank you for that. And thank you, all the resources that are the links are being put in the chat, whether it's the GLAAS survey, but also, again, the recording, the PowerPoint slides, the interactive PowerPoints for you to provide feedback. All the links are being provided to you in the chat, but we'll also be sharing with all registrants the links and for the follow-up. I think maybe another point before we start just moving into the next steps and moving towards the close, as emphasized by Barbara, I think it's really important to understand how geographic areas and populations are affected by climate, understanding the differential impacts. And we really want to learn from your experience at any level that you're working at. And, you know, if you've been involved in monitoring climate resilient WASH and any, you know, useful and relevant, all that information is useful and relevant for us to feed into, you know, honing down on the core set of indicators and in as many contexts in the world. I think also to note that we welcome feedback from organizations, but also from individuals. And we just want to note that when you are providing feedback in the SurveyMonkey, it's useful for us to be able to identify you just so that we can come back to you if we've got questions. So please feel free to note your contact details. And I think also we're really interested, particularly in what governments are collecting, and to a certain extent, we are trying to collect that information through the GLAAS survey and what types of information are being collected by national information systems. But also we realize that there are gaps in what should we be collecting. You know, there are the current practices, but it's also about looking to the future and what is needed and what are the major gaps that you see in your work. And, you know, what are the opportunities that we can then address these. So I think it's really, really important. So we really encourage you in providing feedback in any of the ways that Barbara has outlined. We will, well, maybe we can go to the next slide, James, please. Just to remind you all that the public consultation is open until the 9th of May, 2025, so another couple of weeks or so. And thank you, Remy, for raising your question of what and how is useful for you to provide that feedback. And I think, you know, just to let you know that after the public consultation, we do have the technical working group that will be working with both the JMP and the GLAAS teams and the academic research partners to prioritize the indicators into a shortlist. So we really aim to have this as an open process and consultative process. And then later in the year, we're going to be organizing a public consultation on this shortlist, and we will be, of course, letting you know. So we really encourage you also to sign up for any updates, and the links are available on the website. We will be exploring towards the end of this year, once we define the core set of indicators, and we will be trying to refine these indicators being used and to improve this shortlist on the experience of actually collecting them, and as you know, as early as the end of this year and the beginning of next year. So looking into piloting the core set of indicators. And maybe just before closing officially, because I see we're well on time, I just want to note that this is very much feeding also into the work on Align to Accelerate, which is an initiative that is co-led between UNICEF, WHO, and the World Bank, where we are defining a core set of indicators to monitor the strength of WASH systems. And so we're working very closely with, of course, with this work, and to make sure that these are complementary and aligned. So I think with that, and thank you, Barbara, for posting responses in the chat to some of the questions that have been raised. That's just absolutely wonderful. I think that was my last slide. If you could click to the next slide. I think we'd like to thank you all for registering, for joining us today. And we'd like to wish you a great rest of the day wherever you're joining us from. And thank you to the teams, the presenters, and the big teams and people behind the scenes. So thank you very much, and wishing you a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.